Discerning Hearts provides content dedicated to those on the spiritual journey. To continue production of these videos, prayers, and more, go to discerninghearts.com and click the donate link found there or inside the free Discerning Hearts app to make your donation. Thanks, and God bless.
DiscerningHearts.com presents St. Teresa of Avila, Spiritual Warfare and the Progress of the Soul, with Dan Burke, who is the founder and president of the Avila Institute for Spiritual Formation. He's also the co-host of the Divine Intimacy radio show with his wife, Stephanie. He is the author and editor of more than 17 books on Catholic spirituality, including Devil in the Castle, the book on which this series is based. St. Teresa of Avila, Spiritual Warfare and the Progress of the Soul, with Dan Burke. I'm your host, Kris McGregor. Dan, thank you again for joining me in this conversation about St. Teresa of Avila's interior castle and the tremendous book you've written, The Devil in the Castle, St. Teresa of Avila, Spiritual Warfare and the Progress of the Soul. That's the goal, right? Progress of the soul?
Yeah, we were made for union with him. We weren't made to languish and sort of circle the drain our whole lives. We were made to get out of the drainage system, and to rise with him in union. It's really a beautiful thing. We're created for glory, and it's a joy to work with you because, Discerning Hearts, I think it's a union with God engine, right? A factory. That's the way to think about it. I think we both have, you've got a factory and I've got a factory, and the goal is to produce saints. And so, but truly beyond what we do, the entire divine economy is ordered that we might know union, and he gave his life for that. And it's just such a gift to talk about it and to talk with you about it, and to live the life. I mean, I'm speaking for you, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a pretty amazing life to live, that we get to just give so much time to shedding light on all that the people of God need to know union with him.
Yeah, that progress of the soul, it's encouragement, it's to offer help, and the soul really can't do it alone. It's not meant to be. Even when you think of Saint Anthony of the Desert, the great Saint Anthony of long ago, even he needed others. I think of Athanasius and all or Athanasius. So it depends on what part of the world you're in, how you're going to pronounce it. But you're not meant to have to go on this journey alone. And how wonderful that the spiritual director of Teresa of Avila insisted that she write these things down.
Yeah, you reminds me of a quote from St. Catherine of Siena, God the Father through her, where he said that I have created you in such a way that you're insufficient in and of yourself to know salvation. Meaning, I need you, you need me, we need each other. And even hermits, as you mentioned, desert dwelling hermits, always have spiritual directors and caregivers kind of on the periphery that take care of them, make sure they don't go crazy, and that they eat and have all the sustenance they need. But yeah, we need each other. That's been one of the big lessons for me spiritually, even in growing, because I grew up in the tumult where my instinct was people hurt. And so that being an introvert, you're always sort of moving away from people naturally, but that's not the way to heaven. We have to move toward one another. We have to fight toward one another. We have to stay in challenges. And Teresa even speaks of these things regarding how we treat others and how do we speak to others. And it's part of the journey. It's part of learning to love, which is the ultimate measure.
Well, I said it before. I think this is why your book is important, The Devil in the Castle, because for many people, because they do want to progress in the relationship, they will hear about the interior castle, and they may encounter this wonderful saint who's so engaging and so joy-filled, and her writing is so incredible that you may miss some of her very important teachings about what can happen in prayer if we're not careful, if we don't have a guide, and especially when it comes to temptation. And when we're talking about the fifth mansion, this is one where you really do need to have some help, I think, because I've said it before, I've confessed it, and just when I first read it, I thought, yes, this is exactly the mansion. I forget about those other ones. I mean, those were nice, but this is the one that's speaking to me. And then I realized and it took time, and it was hard, and it was a stumbling when I realized, oh no, I'm not there. And, but I continue to desire to want to be someday.
And that's the key, right?
Yeah.
She even argues that the reason she writes is to give you exactly what you received, which is if we don't understand it or know it's possible, we don't desire it. And if we don't desire it, we don't aspire to it. And if we don't aspire to it, we won't know it, because there's a requirement that we must be open, for God we must invite him, we must engage with him to climb. And so, yeah, so the fact, I don't know, you can't be too overly self-critical, right? Because the fundamental effect happened, and then because this is the gift of living constancy in the interior life. What happened to you happened to me too, but the constancy, staying in, working for humility, allows you to be open to hear, no, you're not there, you're still at the front door, or wherever. That's where I was when I discovered I wasn't actually in. I was just receiving encouragement from the Lord. But one of the challenges with Teresa, I think, is everyone should read her. There's no doubt about that. I think this book makes it easier than any other book I've ever read, because it gives you insights and perspective on who she is. And Dr. Lillis does a great job in the foreword of, obviously setting things up. But it strips out a lot of the distractions. So her personality is beautiful, but her writing is challenging, especially because she does the bunny trail thing in the fifth mansion. She, well, all through it, really, she does a lot of bunny trails. So it can be
She's
challenging.
a woman. I get that. I do that all the time, Dan.
You were very capable of thinking in a linear fashion. But yeah, I mean, women think more holistically, right? Where the bunny trails are tying in other ideas, and but even woman to woman, those can be confusing, right? Where you're trying to go, wait, because the book gives the illusion, and it's true in some sense, that there's this systematic way, right? But the truth is, even as she talks about locutions, which I think are in the sixth mansion, if I remember right, they're not limited to the sixth mansion. Charismatic experiences not limited to the sixth mansion. It's just she's going through a process. It's generally true that she's revealing the progress of the soul. That is generally true, and specifically true in certain cases. But also she covers topics as she thinks of them that maybe are more true for this mansion, but that aren't limited. So that in and of itself, aside from her communication style, has some complexity to it. But she's also an author like John of the Cross. For some reason, I always associate you with Catherine of Siena, and I don't know what it is, but
I'm okay with that. I like her.
Yeah, I
like
just
that.
get the sense that she's one of your buddies. So, the depth and breadth of their thought is imbued with revelations of God, which we are finite creatures, he's infinite. And so they're constantly giving us these windows to the infinite. And that's why I think when we pick it up year one, it's a totally different read than year 6. You know, year one, maybe we're not doing mental prayer. Year 2, we are. Year 3, we pick it up. It's totally different. Year 6, it's totally different. But it's because of the windows to the infinite that new things are always revealed. As I mentioned before we got on the show, I was consoled myself by reading the book and preparing for our conversation, because there's just, you can't, you know, all of these things are also prepared for you when you're ready for them. That's another secret, if you will, to understanding mystical theology. It's so experiential that you can read it and miss things over and over and over. And then the time when you're ready, he will unveil, now look at this wisdom I gave to her. And so that's also another factor. And I think it can be frustrating if we're too prideful as we approach the text and not knowing out front, look, you're not going to understand all of this. And it's okay. You are not broken. You know, you're not doomed. You're not, there's, you know, it isn't really about you in a sense. And it is also about you in the sense that your job is to seek him. Spiritual reading is just one of the disciplines, one of the few disciplines that all of us must undertake to grow spiritually. And you do it faithfully, and he decides what applies when and what fruit comes. And it's just this it's like walking through a garden, and a beautiful garden that you helped to plant, right? And God planted or whatever. You know, Monday, and then Tuesday, you walk through the garden and everything's changed in it, but it's all beautiful and different, which makes it even more beautiful. And then Wednesday, it's all different, but it's beautiful. It's just, that's just the mercy of God. You know, as long as we stay in the garden, he'll keep revealing new and more beautiful things to us.
Boy, what a great way to look at it. I love that. I'm glad we have that down so people can listen to it and go back and think about it, because in this mansion in particular, in this particular chapter on the battles of the fifth mansion, I think is probably, I mean, everyone is a gem. I don't want to make a Sophie's choice, you know, and say this chapter is better than that chapter. It's not. But there's something about this one that I think it speaks to just about everybody that probably is listening to us, because there's a holy, pious intention of heart, I am certain, when people are at this point and they're striving and they're want to have that close union. But boy, the traps, the things that can happen, and the devil is in this area, because as you know, 90% of diabolical activity is temptation. Yes. And this is really a place where temptation, oh, wow, it's going after that soul, isn't it?
Yeah. And as I think I repeated a number of times, and she repeats, which means it's worth repeating, the enemy knows the deeper you get in, the more damage you can do to him and his plans, and the more good you can do for the souls around you. So there are times when the intensity increases because of that. You know, at the outer court before one enters is one of those. I think this is one of those, and it's a transitional time, which is disorienting. The transition from the purgative to the illuminative is fundamentally disorienting to the person, particularly if they're not well formed and they don't really understand what's going on. It really helps when you understand what's going on, but it it's still hard because you reading about it and experiencing and living it is, it's like looking at a beautiful painting of a landscape or something. And I think I may have mentioned this when we first started this series. Albert Bierstadt's Estes Park is one of my favorites, but I've actually been what the painting depicts, been to the place. Mm-hmm. And so you can talk and paint and analogize, and if that's even a word, all of these different ways that we do this, but living it is another thing. And it's, you reference back and you think, okay, is this exactly right? Or what's going on? And that's why we have spiritual directors, right? I mean, mm-hmm. It's mm-hmm. important for us to have objective parties outside of us where we can say, okay, I had this weird experience in prayer. I don't quite get it. Can you help me walk through this? And somebody who's with you, praying as they're talking with you, as they're listening to you, and invoking the Holy Spirit and seeking that wisdom to unpack.
We'll return to St. Teresa of Avila, Spiritual Warfare and the Progress of the Soul with Dan Burke in just a moment. This is Kris McGregor of Discerning Hearts, a nonprofit Catholic apostolate dedicated to evangelization and spiritual formation through the use of new media. Discerning Hearts creates engaging multimedia specializing in audio and video productions which are faithful to the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church and its rich, authentic spiritual tradition. Its mission responds to the Church's call to use the media for evangelization, catechesis, and spiritual renewal. We have made a commitment since the beginning to make the truth shared through Discerning Hearts totally free to users throughout the world. Besides our website, discerninghearts.com, Discerning Hearts has a newly updated free app where users can find all their favorite Discerning Hearts programming, including Father Timothy Gallagher, Dr. Anthony Lillis, Deacon James Keating, Mike Aquilina, Dr. Matthew Bunson, and so many more. There, too, you'll find numerous beautifully produced devotionals and novenas, including the Holy Rosary and Stations of the Cross, to help users create a sacred time for prayer wherever they may be. Discerning Hearts programming can be found on numerous streaming platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and so many more. Discerning Hearts also has an ever-growing YouTube channel. Discerning Hearts online spiritual retreats and seminars have helped souls in North and South America, Europe, Africa, Australia, the Middle East, and the Philippines. For many people all around the world, Discerning Hearts is a daily source of inspiration, spiritual nourishment, and encouragement. We can only do this thanks to the generous financial support of our friends and benefactors. Please consider donating to our mission today. The world is looking for answers, for spiritual guidance and authentic discernment, for relationship and community. Your support is very much needed and appreciated. Please keep our mission in your prayers and tell a friend about Discerning Hearts. We now return to St. Teresa of Avila, Spiritual Warfare and the Progress of the Soul with Dan Burke. Yeah, and I think this is where Teresa, is so good for us to hear today, too, is that it's important to have a spiritual director that understands this type of movement. And I want to be very careful about how I say this because it is just more of an observation on my part than anything else. So you correct me, Dan, okay? But we have to be very careful of a programmatic type of formation, even for a spiritual director, because it's actually, Claude de la Colombière would point out, it's, God is the one that chooses the soul to accompany the other soul. And it's a real deep listening. And it's important when I say programmatic is that sometimes we take, for example, the teachings of St. Ignatius of Loyola, who, as you bring forward in the book and remind everybody, I mean, he was very instrumental in the formation of his confreres, and they ended up helping Teresa and many of the Carmelites in Spain at that time to be able to discern what is happening. And yet for Teresa, there's also this element of the allowing God to work in that soul that is going to probably in cases be outside the box. We can't put God in a box. So you have a way, an ideal in how Ignatius will, give us certain parameters, but you also have to blend that with what God is doing in that. So it requires a lot of deep listening. And I think that's why guys like John of the Cross were so important for Teresa eventually, because she needed for her order those who could understand all the different elements. So it's, I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, you're just reminding me of Living Flame of Love. And he spent a lot of time really, I want to use railing against, I don't know if that's unfair to him, but he's so vehement and repetitive. It almost seems like he's troubled and fighting against something that's really common in his time. Mm-hmm. And that is an abuse of an overly systematic kind of approach to leading the soul where, so for instance, if I have someone who comes to me and asks for a direction, I'm Carmelite primarily. We do use and teach Ignatian discernment, but it's more like I'm a carpenter and I have a tool in my belt, and that's discernment of spirits. That's so right. The I'm a carpenter part is an I'm a Carmelite part. So I get my primary sustenance spiritually from Carmelite tradition. So if I had a Benedictine come to me, I've read the rule of Saint Benedict. I'm a Benedict admirer in a very high degree. He was so important for the church. Have a good sense of Benedictine prayer and spirituality, which has affected me. I think that in particular, Lectio Divina, and that is so strong in Benedictine tradition, is I teach that, so I would be super sensitive, for instance, with a person in Benedictine tradition, that if there was a book, if they were struggling with something and I wanted them to read and reflect on an idea, I would go, okay, this is a Benedictine text. Similar with a Dominican, I would refer them to Garrigou Lagrange before I would refer them to Father Pierre-Marie Eugène, Dominican, Carmelite, respectively. So so I'm speaking at a very practical level. Now let's go to the more divine. Mm-hmm. And that is the Holy Spirit's the protagonist, mm-hmm. not the director,
Right.
And a director has to think of themselves as a servant to the soul, as a servant to the Holy Spirit, not above, but below, not puppeteer, but the washer of the feet, and that is not usually the disposition of people who think, I should be a spiritual director. I'm thinking, well, then probably not. Yeah. I always love, we have a spiritual direction school at the Avila Institute called the Heart of Christ. And I always tell the students, I teach the 3 of the 4 introductory courses. And I always tell them, if you think I should be telling other people how to live their life spiritually, you're not likely called, or you're disordered and you need to be healed. If you are doubting that you could ever do it, you're the one that I'm interested in talking to.
That's it. It's that humility. It's really realizing that I'm nothing. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, but I know I'm loved. Mm-hmm. I might be a nothing, but I'm loved. I know, otherwise I wouldn't be here. God, right. Called you into existence. But it's that humility, that self-knowledge, and ultimately, isn't it, Dan, a Marian heart that we're all called to, the great whatever, do whatever.
Yes.
If you want to give me gifts today, well, then praise you, Lord, and may I do whatever that is. If you don't want to give me gifts today, if you want to pull them back, then praise God, and I know that's what's best for me. You know, I don't know. What were your thoughts about that?
No, I mean, she's the ultimate. Yes, I should say she's the ultimate. I mean, she is the preeminent disciple of Jesus, and her simple, clear utterances of the heart reflect exactly what our hearts should reflect. Do unto me as you will. Whatever is your will, Lord. And then in this chapter, even we talk about what protects you from all of these deceptions, what protects you from the more subtle deceptions, the temptations of light, which we also talked about in the last chapter, are self-awareness, Godward self-awareness, and humility. Those two things. It's almost like, I haven't watched any sort of science fiction movie in like 100 years, but I remember usually the spaceships have some kind of big shield on the out, that this sort of invisible sphere that protects them from onslaughts of the enemy. And then there's the strength of the vehicle itself. Humility and self-awareness are like that big shield around the outside. Godward self-awareness. When that is there, it's hard to get in. No, the devil has no power over a perfectly humble soul. None. And I do mean that. He has no direct ability to manipulate that soul, because there are no handles, there are no, it's just that soul has been purified so much. So, and humility and humility and Godward self-knowledge are symbiotic virtues that strengthen one another. And like, how does it work practically? Well, living by a rule of life, which we also talked about in the last show. Testing yourself in a daily exam and against that rule, so that you can't delude yourself into, I weigh myself every day, so it's not possible for me to say, but I've been eating so well, what's happened? It's just not possible. What's only possible is that I'm deluding myself to thinking I'm eating well, when I'm really not, and I'm not remembering well. But the awake, true awareness and being awake is being in the presence of God and saying, Lord, I want nothing but you. Show me what is deficient in me. And those who are practicing a healthy spiritual life, every night do an examination, very often in Compline, in the Liturgy of the Hours, or a formal exam, and then every day reset the compass when they get up. It's like, okay, and that helps to keep you awake, along with the other spiritual disciplines that we've talked a lot about, the sacraments, that sort of thing. But that keeps awareness high and humility high, because you're constantly going, okay, need to adjust that. Okay, a little off here. Lord, help me. I don't want that to happen again tomorrow. Wasn't so kind. I don't want that to happen again tomorrow. Was a little gluttonous. I don't want that happening again tomorrow. It just keeps you from these trends of self-destruction. And that's what, in the fifth mansion, in the higher orders, you have to guard against. I deal with a lot of different convents and religious and all of that. And there was one who they were cloistered nuns, and they would run the lay people that support them crazy, finding just the right jelly. And they was very insistent that even though there was one form of jelly that they must have from one store, and another form of jelly across the town they must have from another store, they must have them. This is an example, and it may seem very trifling. We can get attached to the most insignificant things.
Mm-hmm.
So these women are so holy, and sleep on straw mats even today. Like this is not easy stuff. They don't have shoes, all of this. But the soul is always, the broken part of us is always moving toward two things. One is God, I think, naturally, but also attachment. If the pieces of us that are not fully his are always looking to grab onto something that gives us a comfort that really should only come from God. And if we're aware and awake, we'll be free of those things eventually.
You've been watching St. Teresa of Avila, Spiritual Warfare and the Progress of the Soul with Dan Burke. To view other episodes of this program, along with hundreds of other spiritual formation programs, view the playlist list below, or you can find them at discerninghearts.com or within the free Discerning Hearts app. There, too, you can download the podcast versions of these conversations. This has been a production of Discerning Hearts. I'm your host, Kris McGregor. We hope that if this has been helpful for you, that you will first pray for our mission, which is to offer authentic and rock-solid spiritual formation freely to souls around the world. And if you feel us worthy, consider a charitable donation, which is fully tax-deductible to help support our efforts. But most of all, we hope that you will tell a friend about discerninghearts.com and join us next time for St. Teresa of Avila, Spiritual Warfare and the Progress of the Soul with Dan Burke.